Whenever World War I is mentioned, it is almost always a discussion about Europe and America, and occasionally the nations associated with European powers such as the Commonwealth. However, despite having a population of more than 400 million at the time, China is almost never mentioned in the context of World War I. The country made enormous contributions to the war effort, and the repercussions of the war led to the creation of the Communist Party of China, which rules the People's Republic of China today. So, this is the history of China and World War I, how the Great War led to the China of today. But first, as always, a bit of context. For centuries, China was the most powerful country in the world, but this was not the case during what's known as the Century of Humiliation, which started in the mid-1800s and continued for, well, about a century. European powers took advantage of China during this time to get spheres of influence and leased land, which were comparable to colonies. For example, Germany attacked and invaded the city of Qingdao in 1897 and later took over the province of Shandong after 2 German missionaries were murdered. Places like Hong Kong, Qingdao, Shanghai, and Tianjin all fell under the control of European powers, which humiliated China. In 1911, the Xinhai Revolution took place, which involved the Qing dynasty getting overthrown by the newly established Republic of China. As many Chinese believed that the country needed radical change to regain stability and power, the Republic ended the dynastical system and the Confucian ideology, which was previously the official state religious and political doctrine. Both of these traditions go back nearly 2,000 years, and they all ended in 1911. During the outbreak of war in Europe, China was still financially chaotic, politically unstable, and had an unprepared military. Various regional warlords still held large amounts of influence, but despite the bad shape of the nation at the time, many believed that China could use the war to restore the country's geopolitical influence and relevance on the global stage. Some government officials believed that China should join the Central Powers by allying with Germany, while others leaned towards working with the Allies. This political controversy, along with many European powers discouraging the country from entering the war, led to China remaining neutral for years after the outbreak of war. Yuan Shiqi, the president of China, secretly offered British diplomat John Jordan 50,000 troops to recapture Qingdao, a German naval base and one of the largest trading ports in the area. But the UK refused and China remained officially neutral. During this time, the Japanese government feared that if the new Chinese government collapsed, Western business leaders might be worried about their investments in the country, leading to Western powers like America, the UK, and France to intervene, thus blocking Japan from exploiting the country's markets and natural resources. The UK in fact wanted to protect its economic interests, and they feared that allowing China to retake Shandong would inspire resistance in Britain's colony of India. Thus, the UK did not allow China to invade the German-controlled land. China requested that the war zone only include land east of Weixian and that the Shandong Railway wouldn't be used to transfer Japanese army troops. But Japan firmly opposed this and China gave in to their pressure. On September 3, 1914, the Japanese army landed at Longguo outside of the German leased territory of Shandong, the same land which China wanted to recapture. It's important to note that Shandong has an historical and cultural importance to China. It is the birthplace of Confucius. But either way, the Shandong Railway was controlled by a private enterprise called the Shandong Railway Company, which was under German and Chinese joint management. The Chinese police force was responsible for its security, and it was not part of the German lease of Shandong. For these reasons, many Chinese protested Japan's actions in the area, but the Japanese military seized the Shandong Railway anyway. Later on, the Japanese military took control over the entirety of German Shandong and established a military administration. After Japan had taken control of Qingdao, they sent a set of demands to China called the 21 Demands on January 18, 1915. In short, these demands included confirming Japan's seizure of Shandong, rails, coasts, and major cities, expanded Japan's influence over South Manchuria and eastern Inner Mongolia, gave Japan rights over mines and other resource extraction sites, and prevented China from giving any coastal or island lands to foreign powers. The most extreme part of these demands, however, would give Japan decisive control over many financial, policing, and governmental affairs. China was not in a politically or economically stable position, thus they had to rely on foreign powers to negotiate a fair agreement. However, Europe was preoccupied with the war, and the US largely just wanted to preserve stability in Asia. China was outraged at these demands, and after lengthy negotiations, a reduced set of 13 demands was sent by Japan on May 7th as an ultimatum. They were still extremely harsh, but demands to give Japan control over financial, policing, and governmental affairs were omitted. China was given 2 days to respond. Yuan Shikai, who was still trying to establish uncontested control over local warlords, accepted appeasement by giving Japan the lands they wanted to prevent the war between the two nations. The final form of the treaty was signed on May 25, 1915. During this time, China was still neutral as they had not formally declared war on any belligerent nation. Chinese citizens were thus not allowed to participate in the fighting. But France wanted laborers to help with the war effort, and so China proposed sending 50,000 laborers to Europe. An agreement was signed on May 14, 1916. As part of this idea called Yinghong Daibing, which literally translates to laborers in the place of soldiers, the UK and Russia also signed agreements to bring Chinese laborers to Europe. In the UK, the War Committee in London formed the Chinese Labour Corps in 1916. They also established a recruiting base in Weihahui on October 31st, 1916. Weihahui was a Chinese territory that was leased to the UK and was thus under their jurisdiction at the time. Most of the volunteer laborers were living in poverty, so the higher wages than what they could find at home led to many volunteering to work in Europe. Most Chinese laborers crossed the Pacific, then traveled across Canada, and finally the Atlantic to arrive in Europe. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Chinese died along the months-long journey to Europe. Chinese workers dug trenches, cleared mines, built munition depots, assembled artillery munitions, repaired roads, railways, and tanks, and so much more. As China stayed neutral due to domestic instability, they mostly focused on sending laborers to the Allies. However, on February 17, 1917, the French passenger and cargo ship SS Athos was sunk by the German U-boat SMU-67 near Malta. The ship was carrying 900 Chinese workers, and 543 of them died from the attack, along with the captain, 112 crew members, and 642 soldiers. Due to this, China severed diplomatic ties with Germany in March. However, as mentioned before, China was very politically unstable during this time. From July 1st, 1917 to July 17th, 1917, the Manchu Restoration attempted to restore the Chinese monarchy. General Zhang Jun led an army to seize Beijing and briefly reinstall the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, Puyi, to the throne. But Republican troops quickly re-established Republican control over Beijing. Nonetheless, after this incident, China was able to officially declare war on the Central Powers on August 14, 1917. Afterwards, China quickly recaptured German and Austro-Hungarian lands in Tianjin and Hangzhou. The premier of the Republic of China, Yuan Qiri, hoped to gain international prestige by entering the war on the side of the Allies. He wished to cancel all the concessions China was forced to make with European powers, like all the previously mentioned leased Chinese territory controlled by the UK, Germany, Austria-Hungary, France, and so on. China's main aims were to get a seat at peace talks at the end of the war, regain control over Shandong, and to reduce Japan's influence over the country. After officially declaring war, the Labor Department of China started officially recruiting Chinese as laborers, but the country never sent any troops to the front lines in Europe. Around 130,000 Chinese went to the UK and France to help with the war effort, and thousands more worked in Russia to help out on the Eastern Front. After the war ended on November 11, 1918, most Chinese laborers in Europe were sent home, but some stayed for many years to clear mines, recover the corpses of soldiers, and fill in the trenches. Most Chinese returned to China, but some chose to stay in Europe. Thousands of Chinese chose to stay in Paris, which eventually led to the Quartier Asiatique, or Chinatown of today. It's debated exactly how many Chinese laborers died during the war. This number ranges from 2,000 to 30,000. However, the number is certainly extremely high, as the cemetery at Neuilly-sur-Mer alone has 838 Chinese gravestones. During peace negotiations at the war's end, China was given 2 seats at the table as they had not supplied any combat troops. The Chinese delegation asked for the Shandong Peninsula, controlled by Germany at the start of the war, to be returned to China, and for the end of imperialistic actions such as foreign leaseholds, which was effectively a form of colonialism. However, Japan, with 5 seats at the negotiation table, was allowed to continue controlling Shandong, and there was no commitment made by Western powers to end policies such as foreign leaseholds. As China effectively got nothing from the Treaty of Versailles, many Chinese protested the perceived weak government of China. Widespread protests began on May 4, 1919, and these demonstrations later became known as the May 4th movement. This internal pressure forced China to be the only delegation not to sign the Treaty of Versailles at the signing ceremony. The May 4th movement primarily called for social and political changes. Some historians point to this moment as the start of China's turn towards communism, as many of the people involved in these demonstrations founded the Communist Party of China in 1921. In establishing the Republic of China by doing away with the dynastical and Confucius systems which existed for 2,000 years, and now having their few demands rejected by the West, China was largely left with an identity crisis and continued instability for all. The Russian Revolution was also taking place during this time, and those inspired by this eventually formed the People's Republic of China of today. And that's in the end of the video. I finally got a proper PC, so I can actually edit videos properly. Maybe you're even watching this video in HD now, which is cool. And yeah, that's about the end of the video, and thank you all so much for watching.